Welcome to Ancient Faith Today. This is Father Thomas Soroka. Christ is risen. How beautiful. In the second week of the Holy Pascha, now we're getting kind of back to the understanding of our church after the St. Thomas Sunday as kind of the normal way in which we do things in the light of the resurrection. So Bright Week is over. Now we're back to kind of our regular experience of the Sunday resurrection services. Through today, we had matins. We had the matins, just kind of like regular matins with some of the resurrectional verses in there. So it's really, really, really beautiful. And so I can see everybody's already discussing this topic here. This is really important, I really will say. And Snakefoot says, I only joined for the food. The food is actually like a big thing. I know that, on Seinfeld, he said he only joined for the hats, right? So whatever, this is important that we talk about this, all right? So if you would like to join into the discussion, join us at youtube.com/ancient Faith Ministries, and you'll see us playing right there. We will be doing a lot of discussing in the chat. I really want to hear from everybody on this one because I can't imagine that there is, in this particular time, a more important issue than the relationship between ethnicity and evangelism. Is there a relationship between the two? Is one essential over the other? Do they both have to coexist? We'll talk about that. So youtube.com/Ancient Faith Ministries or facebook.com if you want to just go into the comment box and put stuff in there. But if you want to join us in the live chat, hit up YouTube. Hi to also the people that are listening on the AFR app. We appreciate your support very, very much. All right, so I don't know if you saw this article. There were actually a couple of articles. I think the one that hit the most was the Archbishop of Australia. Services should be conducted in Greek. We're going to talk about that, but that's not, that one is kind of, it's really out there, to be perfectly honest, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful or anything. I certainly understand, and I'm going to give my own background because I think probably, I would say, other than Dr. Eugenia Constantinou, I'm probably the only other one that is qualified really to speak on this particular issue. Grew up in the church all my life, and I'll explain all of that in a second. But this really is, we're getting kind of to a crucial point. And I think what's really happening is some of the older people, I might say, and I don't say that with any disrespect at all, but they are seeing a lot of these converts come in and they're afraid. They are worried that somehow the church, the nature of the church as they understand it is going to change. I think that's true. The church as they understand it is going to change. But there have been articles, a series of articles written. As I said, there was this newspaper article about the Archbishop of Australia. We'll talk about that in a second. Just to kind of, really, I think, clear the air on it. We have to clear the air on it. We have to make sure that we are putting first things first, because there's no other way to really be Christians. We certainly are not going to, we're not going to give up our evangelical imperative if, people even know what that is. And we'll talk about all of that stuff too. All right. So let's go ahead. We're going to jump right in. By the way, if you want to comment, go ahead right into YouTube and comment, or you can send a text message to 412-206-5012. 412-206-5012. We'll catch your text there. You can also send an email to aft@ancientfaith.com. I did get a bunch of emails last week, but they kind of come too late for the show. And then somebody sent this article today and they said, hey, you should discuss that. And I said, well, guess what? This is what we're discussing today. All right. So we're going to ask Mike and Simon, our brave guys in the booth that are absolutely killing it all the time and keeping on top of everything. We're going to bring up our first slide today. And I just realized I didn't put anything. Oh, did I put something on the first slide? I did. All right. Let's take a look at the first slide. So today we're going to talk about orthodoxy and ethnicity. And the subtitle is, are there two essential modes in Orthodox Christianity? And this question is taken from an article that was published by the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese. And it's a curious article. I would encourage you to just go read it for yourself. You can go to orthodoxobserver.org, and it's called Two Modes, One Church. Two Modes, M-O-D-E-S, One Church, Orthodoxy's Arrival in America. We're not going to read the whole article because it's long, but we're going to read a good bit of it on the screen, and I'm going to summarize that and a couple of other articles which actually came out about a week later. And I think it was almost, it was almost providential that these came out. You know, ultimately, I think what happens is as these issues arise, they, especially when you're talking about an official mouthpiece of the Archdiocese, they're kind of showing what really is important or what the official take should be. And I think certainly, and I don't know this person that wrote this article, Ben Malin, M-A-I-L-A-N, Malin. And I don't know him, but it's an interesting article, but there are holes in it. And I felt like it was an article that was crafted to create a certain conclusion, right? I think this is the problem. It was an article to create a certain conclusion, and we're going to talk about those conclusions. I think the conclusions ultimately are somewhat misguided. I'm not unsympathetic to these issues, but I've been around long enough and I have the credentials to actually kind of look at this particular issue very objectively. All right. So on the first slide there, you have these two modes that the author is talking about in that article. The one on the left is, and if anybody's read any, I would say history of Orthodoxy in America, this is Archbishop, later he was Patriarch of Constantinople, Metaxas, right? And this particular bishop had I would say a lasting impression upon the church. Really did have a lasting impression upon the church. Not always good, but he certainly did. He was very, very aware of what he was doing and the goals that he had in mind. Melitius Metaxas, Melitios, Patriarch Melitios eventually, but he did serve in America. So he would be indicative of the immigrant mentality that came over to to the United States in the early 1900s or late 1800s. That's called like the golden age, right? Or the gilded age, I should say, of immigration in the United States. And on the right, you have the earlier events of St. Herman and those with him who came to Alaska, sent there from Russia, not as immigrants, but as true missionaries. They went to Alaska, of course, to serve some of the native Russians that were there, but that relationship was extremely tense. And that's irrelevant for our discussion today. They really focused very, very much on bringing the Orthodox Christian faith to the native people of Alaska. And that effort really endured for many, many decades and bore much tremendous fruit. So this article is basically going to say, look, Orthodoxy in America has kind of two tracks, right? One is the missionary track, and one is the ethnic immigrant track mode, and they both have to coexist. And we're going to look at some parts of this article. I'm going to give some commentary. I'd like to hear from y'all in the live chat as we're going through this, because this really, truly is, I think, one of the most important issues of the day. And if we don't get this right, we're going to be sorry. All right, slide number 2. So in this particular article, right, you will have, and actually, I just realized I don't have mine up either. Let's see here. Sorry about that. Usually I'm kind of on top of that stuff. All right. So in this particular article, what we have here is a discussion of how ethnicity and orthodoxy supposedly work together. But I'm going to make this personal because this is a very personal issue for me, okay? So that's why I'm showing you these pictures. So the man in the middle. Now, for those of you that are converts or whatever, you haven't been around long, you're going to see all these priests, and they don't have beards. That's because, and I'm telling you the truth, before 1970, not many priests here had beards. That's just the way it was. Before 1970, you'd be hard pressed to find many priests that had beards. The thing was, people they wanted to be American, right? So they went over clean shaven, and that has a very early history. Even Saint Tikhon told his priests, like, shave your beards, look like you're an American, right? Walk around in a suit, things like that. And we can, let's not even worry about those kind of things. The man in the middle is my grandfather. My grandfather was born in 1885. His name is Archpriest, or he had a mitre, actually. He was, Archpriest with the mitre. Mitred Archpriest Gregory Soroka of blessed memory. And he was born in Poland, in an area that was actually annexed by Russia. And he was a native Russian. He wasn't Polish. He wasn't Belarusian. I know a lot of people tell me, oh, you're not Russian. You're this, you're that. No, my grandfather was a native Russian, and he spoke Russian. His native language was Russian, and he never spoke English. Even when he came to this country in 1907, and he died in 1973, he did not speak English at all. Like 5 words, 10 words, that was it. And the reason why was his job as a priest was to serve the population of the churches that he was in. And he was all over he was all over this area of Pittsburgh and even Eastern Pennsylvania. Okay. Now, my grandfather had, he had 3 sons that became priests. He had more than 3 sons, but he had 3 sons that became priests. One of them was my father. So the archpriest that you'll see on the right, Archpriest Vladimir, my father, Leonid, who passed away actually very early on in his ministry, he died of leukemia, and my uncle Igor, my Archpriest Igor Sroka. And they were all known for their work in music. And specifically, they were known for translating music from Church Slavonic into English. And they were all musicians. My father was a trained musician. My uncle was a trained musician, my Uncle Igor. They had beautiful voices and so forth. And here's the point. They all spoke Russian fluently. In fact, my father did not speak English, even though he was born here. My father did not speak English until he was 6, until he went to like kindergarten or first grade or whatever. Like, he never spoke English. He didn't have to. All his family, they all spoke Russian in the home. In church, they all spoke Russian. That's just the way it was. So why am I showing this to you? And there's a little picture of me. There's a little tiny arrow on the left, and I'm the little guy there in a little tiny cassock. I think we are all sort of destined for that. My grandfather's left hand is on my left shoulder, and I cherish that picture very, very much. So why am I showing you this? Well, it's important that you understand that this pattern of passing on your ethnic heritage and your ethnic language, your native language, it has, when you come to a foreign country, especially like the United States, it has a very specific pattern that it follows. And there have been studies done about it. It's absolutely inevitable. And I'm going to say it now, and that is that depending on the circumstances, like my father and my uncle Igor, they both served in the United States Army. They both served during World War II. So my father was a paratrooper. And he was a high-speed radio operator. He was a sharpshooter and so forth. And they were very American, even though his first language was Russian. Now, he didn't have an accent when he spoke English because he had been here all of his life. And there was a great desire to enculturate. In other words, what they wanted to do was they wanted to embrace life here in America. And yes, the church was the place where you, for lack of a better term, you practiced or preserved 2 things. So back in the mid-1900s, so early 1900s, mid-1900s, till about like 1970, 1975, 1980, the church was the place where if you were Russian, if you were Greek, if you were Serbian, you were around like people, right? People that had that ethnic background. But because that immigration pretty much stopped after the 1940s, during World War II, obviously there wasn't much immigration going on. And then even, in little places, depending on the country, like there were people that came over from Russia when communism fell. There were people that came over from Greece. There were people that came over from the Middle East. And there's sort of like a little trickle of those people that come. However, the pattern always plays itself out. And that is here in America, when people came to the church and the church became the locus of their ethnic identity, it was inevitable that by that third generation, which means if they're the first generation and then the second generation is born here and then the third generation is born here, that third generation tends to lose the language. They tend to lose the identity as a part of them. Now, it may be that in the third generation, they are learning the language. They might go to Greek school. They might go to Russian school. I went to Russian school, but I can't speak Russian. I've even tried to study on my own. There's just no time, right? And I have Russian speakers in my parish. But by that third generation, you lose that, right? Now, the real problem here is when you have this divergent model, you have the model in the church where the church becomes kind of like an ethnic group. It becomes an ethnic group that excludes people not of that ethnicity. That is where you start to have a problem, because there are several things that are going to happen. There's going to be a natural attrition in the second, third, and fourth generations, and so forth. It's usually over by the fourth generation. Absolutely over. You will have a natural attrition. Either at the second or third generation, the people that did not learn the language, didn't care about the language, they also, because the church was so closely aligned to that identity, they fell away from the church too. In other words, if they saw the church as being identical with their ethnic heritage, and they're no longer interested in carrying on their ethnic heritage, they will also possibly give up the church. This is a fact, unless that generation understands that one of those things can fall away while the other doesn't have to. Excuse me. So, this is what we're going to talk about today. It's very important. Now, I want to say something here. For those of you that are converts, I am not saying these things to discourage you at all, nor am I saying them to give you license to go after people that may have a different opinion. What I'm begging you to do, if you're a convert, is just be at peace with your situation. Just be at peace with it, okay? Because I promise you, it is going to take care of itself. It's just going to take care of itself. There's no doubt about it, okay? So just be at peace. If you are of the opinion that the church absolutely needs this ethnic identity in order to perpetuate itself, or in order to survive, or that the ethnic identity is essential to the identity of the church herself, I want you to listen up. I want you to listen with open ears and an open mind and an open heart to understand what is at stake here, because there is a lot at stake, okay? I'm saying that out of great respect for you, but I want you to listen closely. All right. So let's go to the next slide, slide number 3. So the article that we're going to talk about is by, and I guess, I'm sorry, I didn't say his name correctly, Ben Mallion. Ben Mallion wrote an article that was published by the Orthodox Observer on April 6th, and it's called Two Modes: One Church, Orthodoxy's Arrival in America. Now, the title is a little bit of a misnomer because the article is not simply about the arrival of the church in America. The writer is using the example of the church in America, that is the Orthodox faith here in America, as a springboard to make a point that both the ethnicity and the evangelical imperative must both coexist and must both be preserved because they are essential to the nature of the church. And, I will tell you right now, this is simply not true, but we'll get to that. Okay. So we're going to look at some paragraphs here of the article, and I want to hear from you in the comments. All right. Let's take a look at slide number 4. So the article begins like this, and some of the word choices, I have to be honest, I felt were a little bit, I don't know. I think I feel like they were taking a jab at conversions and so forth, but I might be misinterpreting. Like the first sentence says, if breathless parish anecdotes and fresh off the press media profiles. There's a little hyperbole in there, right? If breathless parish anecdotes and fresh off the press media profiles are to be believed, the Orthodox Church is one of the few religious communities experiencing growth today in the United States. Largely convert-driven, this renaissance is at once a pleasant surprise, and then it says, and a potential stumbling block for a self-styled, quote, ancient faith. So I don't know if that was a shout out to ancient faith or not, but hey, we'll take it. While inquirers eagerly flock to the church with commendable zeal, her cradle membership, so again, cradle means you're born into the faith, but cradle in this context doesn't simply mean you were born into the faith. Like I have cradle people in my parish now that were born into the faith because their parents converted like last week, right? Like so they're considered cradle, but cradle here means those who bear a particular ethnicity, like me, right? Like I am of Russian ethnicity, and I am the son of a priest whose first language was Russian and whose father's native language was Russian. That's cradle in this context. Her cradle membership flounders, even falls away with every passing generation on these distant shores. Notice, right? So cradle means like the U.S. is distant from the place that some generation of these cradles came from. It's a very strange turn of phrase, because you can be a cradle and never have been out of this country, right? I'm third generation, but there's kind of a little bit of a bias in the article, and you'll see this. Slide number 5. Are these trends indicative of Orthodoxy in America's looming crisis of identity, right? In other words, this is going to be a problem for the church. Or are they rather signs of a propitious convergence of two historic modes of living out the Orthodox faith in the New World? Okay, so what they're saying is that in the New World, right, in America, Canada, whatever, that there are two ways that Orthodoxy is lived. One is as an ethnic cradle, and one is as a convert, that it's inherent to the experience in the New World. Turning to her rich and varied history in America, we find these modes operative at every level of the church, from her hierarchs to her youth, from her grand cathedrals to her humble chapels. Indeed, the great spiritual leaders and saints of the New World are remembered primarily for their efforts to creatively bridge as well as defiantly challenge anyone who would present Christ and culture, evangelism and ethnicity as diametrically opposed reality. All right, put the slide down. That's the first absolute exaggeration. That, you know, the great spiritual leaders and saints of the New World, maybe a few bishops here and there, were constantly trying to sort of present both as important, that ethnicity was important, that spreading the faith was important. But that is not really true. Now, in certain jurisdictions, it may have been true, but it's certainly not true across the board. For instance, in the OCA, which of course is formerly called the Metropolia because it was part of the Russian Orthodox Church, and then when communism fell, there was really no Russian connection to the leadership in Russia. So there were these kind of floundering bodies. There was the Metropolia, which is now the OCA, and then there was ROCOR, which was kind of all over the place. They were in China, they were in Serbia, they were in New York, and so forth. And, the idea that Orthodoxy somehow is inherently that it has to have an ethnic component to it is not true. I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but it's not, and we're gonna get into this pretty deeply. We're gonna look at what Father George Florovsky talks about with culture and so forth. But even in the scriptures, when he's going to talk about the tension between the Jews and the Greeks, he kind of misrepresents this as it is it's just a cultural problem. It's not just a cultural problem. It was a religious issue. It was a truly religious issue because of the nature of Judaism, right? And even the nature of the Roman Empire. But Orthodoxy itself has a much different take on culture, and it's not necessarily what he is presenting here. Now, in the best reading, all he's saying is that when these bishops came over to the United States, they had to deal with the idea of, people that had a certain ethnicity, and they were dealing with them. They were speaking their language. However, it is true, the church became a vehicle for the preservation, the maintenance, even the promotion and the growth of ethnicity. But that was not indigenous to the Orthodox faith. It simply was the place where this happened to be. Because there were plenty of secular societies that were promoting their own ethnicity outside of the church. And the church, endemic to it, did not have to do these things. It did happen. But the reality is that not all the saints and not all the bishops were actually promoting the idea of evangelism and ethnicity as being two important components. In other words, I want to read this sentence again on slide 5. On slide 5, he says at the end, They're remembered primarily for their efforts to creatively bridge as well as defiantly challenge anyone who would present Christ and culture, evangelism, and ethnicity as diametrically opposed realities. Well, times have changed, and for us to present the Orthodox faith as these two components are essential, I can tell you from experience, they are not. They are not. Now, again, I get it. I understand that there are people that have a certain ethnicity and the church kind of plays an important role, but it has to decrease. It will decrease. It will decrease naturally. I'm telling you right now, because this is just what happens. But we also, as Christians, will have to sacrifice things that are not endemic, that are not essential. They will fall away. And one of those will be our ethnicity. God will prune that away. I will guarantee it. And we're going to talk about language, because I read all the nonsense about, well, Greek is different because Greek, the New Testament, and so forth. This is silliness. It's absolute silliness. So we'll talk about that. All right. Slide number 6. There's just a couple more slides here of the article. From this all too brief overview of Orthodoxy in America's two characteristic modes of existence, what lessons from the past might we apply in the present to help ensure a better future for the church in this country? All right. In other words, the crisis that is being set up by this article is, if we don't make sure that both these sides don't, if they don't get along, the church is going to be in a crisis. And it says, the most obvious and essential is simply that neither mode thrives in isolation from the other. Wrong. This is absolutely wrong. Now, if he is saying that in the present condition, these two sides, these two perspectives must be able to get along, I understand that. But to say that they are equal in terms of their essence to the church's life and ministry, this is simply not true. So it says, indeed, the crisis of today is a sign that they must be brought back into conversation, communion, and ultimately convergence. Consider, for instance, how we might answer the following questions as Orthodox Christian. Now look at this. Slide number 7. What does it mean that an immigrant faith is attracting converts in a country whose political climate and leadership is generally wary of, if not openly hostile, immigrants? This particular question is absurd. It is a straw man that has nothing to do with reality. Nothing to do with reality. There are no, this is unbelievable. Number one, the Orthodox faith is not an immigrant faith. It is the true church. It is the church of Christ for every human that walks the face of the earth. It is not an immigrant faith, and we have to stop saying this. We are doing this to ourselves when we call the Orthodox Church an immigrant faith, because then if you're not an immigrant, you're telling people don't come. Now, thank God they're ignoring that and they're just coming anyway. But we're going to chase the weaker ones away who do not understand or who do not want to deal with a church that presents herself as an immigrant faith. Number 2, this country is not openly hostile to immigrants. I'm not making a political statement here. That is a political statement. The statement that was made in the Orthodox Observer is a political statement. I am not making a political statement. This country is not openly hostile to immigrants. What this country has been dealing with for the last year and a half is ensuring that people immigrate legally. That's all it's about. Nothing else. So let's not set this up as an issue. This is ridiculous. And shame on this writer for asserting a position that's not true. Number two, how did a church not so long ago perceived by many to be rigidly insular become such a capacious spiritual home for the many malcontents of secular modernity? So, what a choice of words. Malcontents of secular modernity. And again, if I'm misinterpreting the term that he used here, malcontent of secular modernity, somebody that's a malcontent is like, they are, they're agitated, right? They are like protesting. That the reason people are coming to the Orthodox faith, yes, is because they see that secular modernity is empty. The promises of secular modernity have failed miserably to fulfill the life of any human. They have destroyed the lives of tens of thousands of our own Orthodox people, especially our children. Our children are suffering from the deleterious effects of secular modernity. They're the ones that are struggling with it. And so when you're an Orthodox Christian or you're seeking the true faith, you're not a malcontent of secular modernity. If anything, the Holy Spirit is enlightening you to say exactly what Jesus says. Jesus says that we are called out of the world, right? We are in the world, but we are not of the world. This is, and he says, you are not of the world. I am not of the world, Jesus says of himself. And, we are called literally to hate the things of the world. And the most destructive aspect of our culture is secular modernity. So exactly, right? We are not of this world. This is what the gospel message is. So to present this as a bunch of malcontents, I think is this language is just needlessly inflammatory. And then why is it that those who are born and raised Orthodox in this country so often live and die outside the faith? I can answer that very easily. And that is because they mistook their ethnicity for the Orthodox faith. That's what happened. All right? You see what I'm talking about? This is what is important here, okay? And I see Alex on the in the chat there. So, I'm curious, guys in the booth, is there a way that we can, because I would really like to talk to Alex about this, because he grew up Romanian, although I think he was a Protestant. I don't know, Alex, if you're interested in, if we can bring him on a little bit, but I would Alex Soren, if you guys see him in the chat and maybe you can send him a link, and Alex, if you're interested in it, come on and let's go through this together, because this is really important. Okay. So guys in the booth, if you can send him a link somehow, Alex, if you can let us know how we can contact you, you're welcome to come on in and let's have this discussion. All right. So in this question here, look at then slide number 8. So now he's using this, he's using the Greek words of St. Paul to actually make a point about xenophobia, right? Make a point about xenophobia. What he says here is, this is slide number 8. What would St. Paul say to the Orthodox Church in America today? Among other things, he would likely repeat what he wrote to the Ephesians. Gentiles were once strangers, xenoi, right? There's a reason why he's saying this, xenoi. To the commonwealth of Israel, politeos tuth Israel, but now in Christ Jesus, you were once far off, been brought near. Therefore, he continued, you are no longer strangers, xenoi, right? And foreigners, parokoi, but fellow citizens, sympolitai, with the saints and members of the household, right? Oikeoi of God. Now, there's a reason why he's saying this. There's a reason why he's saying this, because the last slide is slide number 9. He says, there is no place for xenophobia within the church. However construed. Well, if you're saying that because I am suggesting that ethnicity is not essential to the Orthodox faith, and therefore I am xenophobic, even though I have no problem with ethnic food. I have no problem with using, every so often I'll use some Slavonic because I have Russian people in my parish. I'll use Greek. I'll use Spanish. I don't care. I'll use any of it. However, it says there's no place for xenophobia within the church, however construed. All belong to the same oikos of God. Indeed, the bonds of this fellowship are so strong that they transcend every earthly care, as Paul assured the beleaguered and divided Philippians, for your citizenship is in heaven, from which we also eagerly wait for the Savior, who is himself able to subdue all things to himself. However, look, this is applying something. Hey, yeah, we can't get him a video link? Is it possible, guys? Can we get him a video link? Or, yeah, Alex, if you can call that number, they'll send you something, okay? Because I want to get him on the video if possible. If it's possible, but maybe you're at home. Or maybe you're at work. I don't know. So, look at slide number 10. Look at slide number 10. I brought this article down to 3 points. The 3 points that the article made are, this is slide number 10. The church's history in America is defined by convergence of the missionary impulse, the Russian missions in Alaska, and immigration, the influx of Greeks, Slavs, and Arabs in the early 20th century. All right? Then, evangelism and ethnicity are not opposing forces. In essence, they are not opposing forces until the idea of ethnicity entirely replaces your understanding or your acceptance of the gospel and of being an Orthodox Christian. That's the problem. It's not that evangelism and ethnicity somehow are, diametrically opposed in a vacuum. It's that within the church, if your ethnicity is the only connection that you have to the church, if it's your only connection to the gospel, then the problem becomes very apparent. This is the problem. And then finally, it says to avoid a modern identity crisis, the church must transcend both exclusive ethnic enclaves and reactionary political ideologies. Again, this is a straw man. just because somebody is converting and they happen to be a conservative doesn't mean that they are some kind of political reactionary that hates people that aren't, I don't know, like white Anglo-Saxon former Protestants. Like, that's not what's happening here at all. And it's disingenuous to create this dichotomy between the two. It really is disingenuous. Now, and again, if I'm reading this wrong, let me know. Let me know, okay? Look at slide number 11. Slide number 11 says, after this article was posted on April 6th in the Orthodox Observer, it was very interesting. There was another article that was posted by an author, but it was a discussion of Archbishop Elpidophoros' 2010 vision of the church in the United States. In other words, kind of he's showing his vision, right? He's showing his vision of what the church should be. And it is very interesting, to be perfectly honest, because he's going to say a few things here that sound diametrically opposed to the previous article. Then we'll get to the Archbishop of Australia, okay? So look at the 3 points that I pulled out in slide number 12 of this article about Archbishop Elpidophoros' vision for the church in 2010, right? It's like a retrospective, okay? It says, the church's original and canonical foundation is based on geographical territory rather than national or ethnic identity. Absolutely. This is wonderful. That Archbishop Elpidophoros said this is incredible. It's perfect. A bishop is elected for a specific city or region to serve all its inhabitants, reflecting a universal identity where there's neither Jew nor Greek. Perfect. You can't argue with that one bit. Okay? Next. The term Greek in this context should not be understood as a modern nationalistic or ethnic label. Yes. Okay, I'll accept that. Instead, it refers to a transnational ecumenical heritage that respects cultural diversity without attempting to Hellenize them. Okay, great. That's what Archbishop Elpidophoros is saying. He's saying, hey, you know, we're just called the Greek Orthodox because, you know, this is Greek Orthodoxy is like kind of the universal Orthodox church, the church that has a kind of Hellenistic heritage. All right, okay, great. But then he says, Orthodoxy in America is moving past its immigrant beginnings. This calls for a unified witness that reflects the beautiful mosaic of American life, rooted in a shared faith and canonical tradition, rather than being divided by the ethnic origins of various jurisdictions. So I'm going to give this statement a kind of B-. And the reason why is, first of all, in America, if we look at if there is such a thing, right? The American culture, the American vibe. And this has been a problem for a while, okay? The problem has been that in this particular country, in the United States, we were never known as a mosaic. That was Canada. Canada is the mosaic. What we were known as is a melting pot, right? A melting pot. And that melting pot meant that people kind of threw something of their culture in order to embrace the American ideals, the American way of life. And this that view of American life really ultimately gave way to a philosophy of multiculturalism. And that was part of the problem there. The multiculturalism then became a way of people not only becoming American, but simply being an American citizen while absolutely doggedly maintaining their ethnicity of their own. That's the Mosaic part of it. But that was never an American thing until about 5 minutes ago. It was always America as a melting pot. So, we have to understand that this approach is not necessarily the calls for a unified witness that reflects the beautiful mosaic of American life. That's still, it's not endemic to Orthodox Christianity to say, oh, well, we have to have all of these ethnicities in one big church. Everybody's going to be able to keep their languages, and they're going to be able to keep their food, and they're going to be able to keep their costumes and so forth, when the reality is, and I'll get to sort of my questions in a moment, the reality is they are only essential. These things are only essential to those of that ethnicity. They are not essential to the Orthodox faith. They're not. Even the Greek part of it, it's not essential to the Orthodox faith. And I've seen all the online comments. They say, well, what about the New Testament? The New Testament was written in Greek. Look, the reality of it, and we're going to get to the language thing right now. The reality of it is those who are modern Greek speakers, just like those who are modern Russian speakers, they don't understand liturgical Greek fully. They don't understand it fully. They get a word here, they get a phrase there, they kind of get the gist of it. They might sort of they're able to follow the divine liturgy because they know it, they've been through it. But take them to a vigil, take them to a matins, take them to a vespers or some, Maleben or whatever. They're not going to be able to understand those words. I will guarantee it. They can't understand those words that are flying by them. All these stikira, for that we sing for, today, we have just for the Tuesday, the second Tuesday of Pascha. You have all of these words flying by, and the people who are Greek speakers, modern Greek speakers, they don't understand those words when they're in liturgical Greek. The Russians don't understand Church Slavonic. And I've heard people say, oh, well, if they're highly educated and so forth. Well, if they're highly educated, they still don't understand it. They might understand a little bit more, but you don't need to be, conjugating verbs in your head when you're at church. You just hear it and you understand it. This is the problem. This kind of proves the point. All right. Now, here's the article that everybody wanted to see. And that is this Archbishop of Australia. And again, I don't have anything against him. I'm sure he's a wonderful man. Makarios, I think his name is, yes? Archbishop of Australia. Look at slide number 13. Slide number 13. These are the 3 points. These are the 3 points that he made. And the article is basically just quoting him on, of all things, the sermon of Holy Friday Vespers. My goodness gracious. The sermon of Holy Friday Vespers, and you're talking about language. What in the world are you thinking when you're talking about there wasn't enough Greek in the service? My goodness gracious. If a bishop has an issue with there not being enough Greek in the service, go talk to the chanters or the priest after the service. But don't pontificate standing in front of the Lord's cross, who just got crucified at the gospel reading, and we took him down from the cross, and we're carping about there's not enough Greek. This is just horrible. It's ridiculous. So here's the 3 points. The Greek language, this is what he said. The Greek language is central to the identity of the church in the diaspora. So the diaspora, if you don't know, that's like the scattering, the dispersion of people of a particular ethnicity all over the world, except in their homeland. It says, if the church loses its Greek identity, then we are in serious trouble. Yikes. This is unbelievable. You can't talk about this, right? You can't say this. If the church loses its Greek identity, then we are in trouble, right? Next, he expressed dissatisfaction with services being split equally between Greek and English, insisting that while some English can be used to engage young people, the primary liturgical language must remain Greek, but not half in Greek, half in English. Again, the issue is the natural attrition of people as generations go on. Now, if Australia is just becoming a hotbed of emigration, then okay, that's a different story. But you have to think about the young people. There are not, I'm telling you right now, there are not enough language classes. There are not enough dance classes. There are not enough cooking classes to keep those young people in the church. What's going to keep those young people in the church is Christ and understanding what is going on. That's the only thing that is going to keep them in the church. And then finally, the third point, finding Greek-speaking chanters is a non-negotiable priority. We do not forget who we are. So this is kind of the saddest part of the whole issue. The saddest part of the whole issue is you still have, now, you know, a Greek priest friend of mine pointed out, he said that in Australia, they are where the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese was like 50 years ago. Like they're really back there. And so I get that. I get it. But there is still the reality. If you want to talk about being reactionary, right? Reactionary is when you start to see your attendance go down and you say, oh, we have to do something. Maybe we should start using English when half the people left because they don't understand anything anyway. That's reactionary. That means if the people that honestly, let's be very honest here, okay? The issue is the people that are speaking a foreign language, Russian, Greek, Romanian, Serbian, Arabic, whatever. I will guarantee you 95% of them do their business in English. They do their business in English. They conduct their businesses in English. They order hamburgers in English. They go to restaurants. They are in English. But when they're home, they speak their language. Great. The question is, if you can do your banking in English, if you can do your business in English, if you can conduct your business affairs in English, if you can go to your kid's school and you can speak in English, if you can do that, then you can hear English in church. Just because you speak a language does not mean that you have to hear it in church. It doesn't matter that you paid the most money or whatever. What we have to understand is the gospel imperative. All right. Take a look at 14, 15, and then we're done. It says, funny thing is he wrote this in English. Well, I think the article was originally written in Greek and then it was translated in English. I believe that's the case. So I want to point out what I feel are the most problematic statements. Okay. Slide number 14. From each one of these articles, I would say the most problematic statements are, number one, evangelism and ethnicity are not opposing forces. Well, they can be opposing forces. They actually can be opposing forces. Because if your ethnicity is hindering the evangelism, then yes, they are actually opposing forces, right? Let's bring Alex on. Are you there? I'm not sure I can hear you. Alex, can I hear you?
Yes.
Guys, I can't hear him. There we go. Hey.
Hello, Father.
Christ is risen.
Truly he is risen.
Or should I say, Christos a inviat? Should we just speak in Romanian?
Inviat. Yeah, well, I mean, that's fitting to the topic today, isn't it?
Right. Let's go through these two, and I want to get your take on this.
Sure.
Because you're probably more gentle about this than I am, but this gets
I don't know about that.
Archbishop Elpidophoros said, this calls for a unified witness that reflects the beautiful mosaic of American life. I don't think American life needs a mosaic. Again, I think they're nice in terms of everybody contributing something, but I don't think it's going to move the ball forward for the growth of the church. Ultimately, that has to be kind of given up in a sense. And then the worst one was from the last article of the Archbishop of Australia. Says, if the church loses its Greek identity, then we are in serious trouble. You're not. You're not. You're not in serious trouble because there orthodoxies all over the world. Now, I understand if he's saying that Australia is a very important part of the Greek diaspora. In fact, in another article, he says it has become a new Greece. He said it's become a new Greece. I don't think the Australians would be happy about that, but it's become a new Greece. And therefore, when you say, if the church loses its Greek identity, then we are in serious trouble, even if you try to massage that statement to say, well, we have the church fathers and we have the liturgy and we have the New Testament and so forth, like we need this Greek part. That does not equate to dancing and food and even doing the divine liturgy in Greek, because they're going to do it in Greek in Greece. It's always going to be done in Greek in Greece, not in Australia. Alex, what do you think?
That's right. Well, my spiritual father, he is as Romanian can be. He's a monk. He only became a parish priest, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. And he is, he sees the other side of the story, where there are some terms that you can't really take out of the language, like Theotokos. It just doesn't quite have the same ring in English, right? Or Theanthropos, the God man. These terms don't quite have the same ring. However, even he sees that at some point, at least in America, we're going to have to move towards, the vulgar tongue, to use the old speak, to use English, because this is something the church has always done, even creating a Cyrillic alphabet, Saint Cyril and Methodius going to the Slavic lands and sorting that out for the Slavic peoples. And this is a way that the church evangelizes, right? There's a big complaint from like evangelical Christians where they say, well, how come you Orthodox don't stand at the street corner with cardboard signs and yell at people and evangelize? Well, we do that through processions. And if you don't have, a language that people can understand or connect with, it kind of, to use the Gen Z language, it kind of nerfs the Orthodox ability to evangelize.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I know that there's a kind of fine line with maintaining the theological precision, right? Now, let's take that statement to its logical absurdity where, and I don't know if you've been following this issue online at all, but there are all kinds of comments that are basically saying that, look, it's the old joke. If Greek was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. But they're more like, they're saying the New Testament was written in Greek. The church fathers wrote in Greek. We need, the liturgy is in Greek. We need to maintain it because of that. But the reality of this issue is not about, because I want to address exactly what you said. Somebody made a comment on one of these articles, and they said, the reason why Greek is important is because no other language has this kind of theological precision, right? The problem with this view is it entirely negates the idea of the gospel being preached to the whole world. It negates Acts 2, where everybody hears the gospel in his own language, the miracle of Acts 2. It negates the vision in the book of Revelation where, innumerable people of every tribe and every tongue, right, and every race are gathered around the throne of God. And it exclusivizes Orthodoxy to be the church of just like, of a few ethnicities and preserving ethnicities for the sake of what? And so this problem of even saying English is incapable of expressing these theological words. We know when you look at all the different translations of the Bible, and we have some excellent biblical scholars as Orthodox Christians, right? We know that English has its own oddities. Like you have the word love, right? And in Greek, you have like 5 words for love, whatever it is. So right. Yeah, that nuance is there. But you can still use other words. Like when Jesus is talking to Peter, he says, Peter, do you love me? And it's like he uses 2 different words for love, right? Peter answers him with a different word for love. And when you're reading it, it's like, he didn't just say love. He's saying like filial love, right? Right. So I think it's not insurmountable. Russian people tell me the same thing. Oh, Father, the Slavonic, you hear Slavonic is so beautiful. Это красиво, and it's like, I said, Russian produced Pushkin. Russian produced Dostoevsky. It's like, it's just not impossible to have beautiful liturgy, beautiful liturgical texts in Russian, in English that are elevated and worthy of the truth of the Orthodox faith. That's my take on it. No, yeah. I'm not taking anything away from your spiritual father at all. I'm just saying that we just have to work harder.
I agree with you, Father. And, if we just look at the history of God's people, right, it starts off like, let's just, for example, start with the Lord taking them and freeing them from Egypt. Moses didn't speak Hebrew or Paleo-Hebrew. He spoke some dialect of some Canaanite language. And when the scriptures were first written, they were written in Paleo-Hebrew, which is a different script than Hebrew. And by the time we get to the time of Christ, most of the synagogues, they weren't in Hebrew at all. They were either in Greek or Aramaic. So despite, the adaptation of humans to different languages over time, through God's providence, we can trust that he's going to protect the church and the message of the church. I think my point was just more like, maybe there are certain terms that have a certain aesthetic ring to them or something, right? But I think you're absolutely right on this, that language, although I can see how, in understanding the scriptures, we have plenty of scholars that do it. But in terms of feeding the people of God, and better than I do, Father, in terms of guiding your flock, that it's important for them to understand what's going on in the liturgy. And I think there are priests that are moving more and more in this direction to where many of the prayers behind the iconostasis typically were done quietly and, just between the priest and himself. I know many priests now that are bringing mics with them back there so that the congregation can actually hear the prayers that they're saying, because they're filled with theology, they're filled with learning, and they're very important. So I think you're absolutely really spot on in your analysis here, Father. Absolutely spot on.
Just a personal point of privilege, or what is it? I don't know the legal term. What is your background? And I know you're Romanian, but did you grow up in the Orthodox faith? And what happened there? If you don't mind me asking.
Not at all. I was raised Romanian Pentecostal my whole life, basically up until 26, 27. I'm 33 now. And then I spent a couple of years. I started questioning the Pentecostalism and the charismatic movement in general. And I spent some time in like a independent MacArthur's, like John MacArthur style Bible church, like very Calvinisty, And I think that actually provided a good contrast for me there, because in charismatic circles, like these people are always looking for spiritual experiences and like new revivals and Pentecosts and things, as if the first one wasn't good enough. They have to go find other ones. But on the other hand, in these independent, like tulip kind of Bible churches, they're so focused on the text, and so academic that they have absolutely no spirituality at all. And they're on the other end of the spectrum. I think when I was reading the introduction to, it was like during this period that I got curious and started investigating church history. And I took the same approach I would to any case that I had on my caseload or case file that day. I just went through all the writings, not all of them, but the main writings. I consumed all the facts and I put out the timeline of the facts. And I was just thinking, like, man, I'll be darned. It seems like the Orthodox Church has the best claim to historical continuity. And after examining some of the schisms there, the straight line from today all the way back to the time of the apostles is the Orthodox Church. So that's how I ended up in the Romanian Patriarchate today, under the Romanian jurisdiction today, because I understood the language mostly, and I thought it would be a shame to not take advantage of that. So I was received into the church.
Speak it at home?
Well, my parents spoke Romanian. It was kind of that thing. You were mentioning it earlier that by the time you get to the second, third, fourth generation, the language mostly fades away. But my parents were immigrants here, and I was the first generation born here. So they would speak to me in Romanian, and until I went to like kindergarten, all I did was speak Romanian. So I remember watching cartoons and trying to like imitate the way that they speak. And that's kind of how I like formed my English, right? So by going to school and watching TV. But to this day, they'll speak to me in Romanian and I'll kind of respond back in English. So it's a bit broken Romanian, but it gets me, I get by. So
That's great. I might be actually going to Romania in a few months. I have two parishioners that are there. One of them is doing some work there, academic work with the Orthodox Church in Romania. So I'm looking forward to going to Sibiu.
That's a beautiful city. I've been to Romania in 2019. Or maybe 2018, and then also in 2022. And each time I go there, I'm just shocked by how different it is from a Western country. Like really, you can just wander in any direction for 10 minutes and find some kind of adventure. But in terms of Holy Orthodoxy, there's just so much going on there. In terms of academia and scholarship, not to boast, we have some good theologians. Saint, I guess the anglicized way to pronounce his name, Saint Dumitru Staniloae. Yes,
I met him, and I have a book. I have his book of the book 1 of dogmatic theology. He signed it.
Wow.
He was at St. Vladimir Seminary when I was there, and he signed it. And I was like, I don't even know who this guy is, but he's selling a book. This is true. So I have his book. He signed it, and I went to Mount Athos with Father Roman Braga.
Wow.
And we spent 7 days at the Prodromu Skit, which is the Romanian monastery there. And so, I'm rubbing elbows with the Romanians, some big time Romanian saints.
Yeah, well, I think
I hope they're praying for me.
I think Father Braga, has he been canonized yet, or he's like up for canonization? I think
he's up for that. Yeah.
And then the Saint Staniloy recently was canonized. But what a treasure to have met him at in seminary and to have that signed copy. Yeah.
Yeah, really incredible. All right, I want to go through one more slide. Actually, I think it's two, and then we're done. By the way, thank you for taking the time out to join us. I've been watching you for a long time. I hope that you can talk about your channel a little bit before we go. All right, I just want to do this real fast. Where am I? All right, realities, slide number 15. Let's take a look at this. There's nothing to argue here. This is what it is. The realities are liturgical language in the parish is a pastoral issue. It is. Every parish is different. So if, you have a bunch of people in your parish and like everybody speaks Greek and they all know Greek, all right, do it in Greek. But you can't artificially make this a part of the Orthodox faith. This is a purely pastoral issue. If you don't have anybody that speaks Greek in your parish, it's not the end of your church. You just don't do Greek. You do it in English or whatever language they speak. This is very simple. Number two, while liturgical languages are a thing, the gospel imperative, right? Go into the whole world and preach the gospel, mandates that the message and the worship be conducted in the native language of the people. The Bible is so clear about this. Psalm 46, sing praises with understanding. Or St. Paul, when he's talking about speaking in tongues, he's talking about speaking in tongues, but it's still the same principle. I will pray with the Spirit and I will pray with the understanding. I will sing with the Spirit, but I will also sing with the understanding. Otherwise, and here, this is the best point. If you bless with the Spirit, in other words, if you're speaking in tongues, how will he who occupies the place of the uninformed say amen at your giving of thanks since he doesn't understand what you're saying? Right? Like, this is simple. If you are standing in a church and everybody's speaking Chinese and you're in the middle of Iowa, like, you can't say amen to that because you don't understand it. So this is an important principle. Understanding, there's no Orthodox principle that says there's some like holy language. This just doesn't exist. Yes, we receive the gospel in Greek, but by the way, we receive the gospel in Greek precisely because, somebody said, well, English is a transactional language, but Greek is a deep mystical language. Greek was the transactional language of its day. That's why the gospel was written in Greek. People did their sales in Greek. They did all of their daily affairs in Greek. That's why they wrote the gospel in Greek. So it's silly to say that. And then, as I said, immigrant children lose their language by the third generation. All right. I had a bunch of slides about Florovsky. We'll talk about that another time. He's amazing. I was talking about Christianity and culture. But slide number 21, the end. Here we go. Slide number 21. I made it really simple. Are there two inherent modes to Orthodox Christianity? My answer, no. And the way that we can prove that is remove one of them to test it. All right? If you have like he was talking about the evangelism and the ethnicity, right? The evangelistic imperative and the ethnicity. Remove one and see if you still have a church. If you remove the ethnicity, you still have the church. If you remove the evangelism, you have a restaurant. This is not difficult to understand this, right? So they are not inherent to orthodoxy. Number two, are evangelism and an ethnicity in opposition to one another? I would say not essentially, but potentially they are. Ethnicity can overshadow the evangelical imperative. While all Orthodox Christians live within a given culture, we are called to baptize the culture in which we live. Whatever can be redeemed will be transfigured and reveal its true meaning. And that actually is what Father Georgios Florovsky said. He said that the Christians did not simply accept the culture they were in, the Roman culture they were in, the early Christians. They transfigured it. They transformed it, right? we cannot accept every culture as simply being part of something good and holy. It has to be transfigured and has to be transformed. And so it is with American and English and so forth. We have to have our sights on the gospel. All right. We went a really long time. Alex, thank you so much. And I do want to say how much I admire you and your work and your, I want to say your disposition. Your disposition is exemplary because you remain calm, you remain respectful, you throw in a lot of humor. And that's really important. People are watching Orthodoxy, and if we do not present the Orthodox way, if we don't present a disposition that is truly Christian, I don't mean it has to be boring. I don't mean it has to be deadpan. I mean it has to reflect Christ. It has to reflect that we're actually Christians and we're not just duking it out online. I appreciate your work very, very much, and may God continue to bless you and increase all of the good work that you're doing.
Thank you very much, Father Tom. And of course, it goes both ways. I think the work that you've been doing online is also it got my attention, especially with the penal substitutionary atonement series that you were doing. You have a few streams out on that. And I think it is an exciting time for a Holy Orthodoxy, especially in North America, as Metropolitan Saba, said, and I think it was last year, he was talking about the year of evangelism in Holy Orthodoxy. It is certainly an exciting time. So I appreciate very much you having me on. It goes both ways. I think you have a very good point as well, Father, in how we hold ourselves out. There's a way to be staunch in our position and uncompromising, while also not being unnecessarily badgering to others, right? Like you said, it doesn't mean that we need to be wishy-washy or deadpan. We can be strong and firm in our position, without actually having to attack others. We don't have to be anti everyone else. We can just be pro Holy Orthodoxy.
Yeah, I don't. I know that things can get heated at times. Unfortunate things have been said, but we all have to recognize we're all on the same team, right? And if there's any kind of marginalizing or, I don't know what it is, but I hope that there's going to be healing, and I hope there's going to be more cooperation and love engendered among all of us. So type in Alex Sorin, Sorin. You won't be disappointed. There's so many good things that he's doing there. All right.
Thank you, Father.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us. Sorry to go so long. Thanks to everybody that tuned in. Join us next week, because we're going to talk about some more really important issues. We'll bring that out online. Could you give us a like on this, especially now that Alex is here? So now you can really like it, right? So give us a like, share it out. Send me an email, aft@ancientfaith.com. Let me know if there's topics you want to talk about. I hope that this was helpful. I'm not against ethnicity. I'm not against language. I am against the wrong application of those things. I love my ethnicity. I love my the native language of my ethnicity, but I love Christ more. And I don't want that to get in the way of anybody coming to his church. That's our show for tonight. Remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com. Share it out when it's posted. Give us your feedback. Contact us with any ideas or topics that you might want to hear about. And join us next Tuesday evening, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, for another edition of Ancient Faith Today Live. Good night, everybody. Christ is risen.